how do you think that this plays out in the days to come? And is there an alternative? Is there someone else in the organ? Like, again, they have Romy Gonzalez, they have Toro right now at first base. Do you think that if not Devers, then do you think that it's those two guys, assuming they go internal, or is there someone else that you think could also be part of a discussion?
I think what they did overnight was the right move, right? The question for me was, is it going to be Toro? You're going to add him to the roster, or is it going to be Sogard? But I think like somebody like Romy Gonzalez is very good, right? In his
Mm-hmm.
role, he is very good. Like every utility player, including myself, wants an opportunity to play, show that they can play every single day, right? So I think for now, I think Romy Gonzalez, who by the way has a little bit of injury history too, right?
Yeah.
So you don't want to run him into the ground. Like for
And who, by the
now,
way,
I
is
think.
relatively new at first base, too.
Yeah, he's
Yeah.
figuring it out too. The other day he almost got a little messed up on a ground ball up the middle. He thought it was going to get through, had to get back
Yep.
on that David Hamilton play. So he's figuring it out, just like Toro's trying to figure it out. Everybody, Vaughn Grissom's trying to figure it out. So I think short term they did the right thing. I know what they're saying publicly, and listen, I don't have any inside knowledge, whatever, but I'd like to think that there's a private conversation in the next couple of days. They sit down with Devers just to sort of feel what this thing is. I look at what happened up in Toronto, and again, I know we all know he's good friends with Vlad Guerrero Jr. If you think about if this was the scenario, because Toronto didn't really have much over there at first base, the way they could improve their ball club was to go sign a guy like Matt Chapman.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe that's when Vlad moved over to first base. And it
Yep.
was, so now, yeah, at the beginning of the year, Casas was involved, okay? But now when you look at it, it's like, we really don't have an answer at first base. We have Alex Bregman at third. Like, this is a very similar move. There's a very similar acceptance of, you want the best team out in the field. I need you at first. We'd like to have you at first, however you want to phrase it, because then maybe I can get, Massa, MIA Massa, who might be able to still swing it with that shoulder, or I just open it up for, say a Ref Schneider, a Massa Ref Schneider platoon, or whatever, however you want to work it, right? Like I just think it's easier to fill that hitter spot and play matchups and keep Raffy Devers in there every day at first base. So I like to think there's private conversations going on. I like to think that Rafi would just go in and be like, "Hey, let's try this," But I don't know. I don't want to speak for anybody. I don't know where his head is at, but I just feel like that. Think about it, Alex. When you're looking down on this field, this team from like 4,000 feet, isn't that the move? Like, wouldn't everybody think that that's the move?
Yeah, well, I mean, we saw like over the weekend. You probably saw the kind of social media clip of Massa throwing, Massa
Yeah, it
working to
didn't look good.
throw on the field, and like him wincing when he was trying to air it out and like shaking his head. So it does look like it's going to be a little while before outfield is a real consideration. Let's not forget too that when he last played the outfield when he was 2 years younger, it wasn't exactly great at that point. I realized that the Red Sox saw progress over the course of that season, but the bar was, the where that got to was still not not an elite defensive outfielder by any stretch of the imagination, or even anywhere close to being an average one. So yeah, I think that it is a very interesting, if you've lost the bat of Casas, right? Like, if you have Rafi Devers at first base, then you have a faster path for getting Yoshida back onto the roster. Or you also create avenues where maybe they rotate the DH, in which case that makes it a little bit easier to consider call-ups at a certain point for the likes of Marcelo Mayer or Roman Anthony, in seeing them contribute in the lineup. But I think that as we think about these shufflings, we've identified Devers as someone whose skill set arguably looks like a
Yeah,
pretty good fit for this. And I having a conversation is not the same thing as saying you will do this. It's like, hey,
correct.
you still continue to take ground balls at third base. That's part of your routine. What if instead of taking the grounders at third base, where we've said you're not going to be playing this year, you tried some at first base and saw how that went? I don't know whether or not, and get his feedback. I think that that's kind of just have the conversation. I do wonder whether or not there is too much caution surrounding this, and if Devers wanted to play defense, right? That was part of the problem. So maybe he would actually be. I don't know. I don't know the answer to that question, whether or not he would be enthusiastic about the idea of having the possibility of defense put in front of him, or whether or not he would say, you know what, I'm good. I like where I'm at right now with my routine, but have
Yeah,
the
yeah,
conversation.
and You were bringing up a couple guys that he already shut down, right? Roman Anthony. All right.
Should they
I
have shot
just
them down?
yes, yeah. Roman
Okay.
Anthony, 100%. Roman Anthony, 100%. I'll get to Marcelo in a minute, but Roman,
Yeah.
yes, because he's an outfielder. Like he's an outfielder. We already kept talking about it. Not every outfielder can play first base.
Yep.
I don't know whether he can or can't. You know what I mean? But he's never taken a ground ball. You keep a guy close at first base and the lefty's up. All right, that is a shock when the guy turns
Yeah.
and hits one to you and you're hopping off the base. I
Yeah.
don't want anything to. I don't want this kid coming up as a rookie, the number one prospect, and not swinging it because he's a mess at first base, which he just learned. And here's the
Hmm.
other one. I also don't want him DHing. This is the other
Right.
thing. Everyone's like, bring Raffy at first and call up Anthony and have him DH. We're talking about Raffy Devers, like who's struggling to learn how to DH. You've heard from Paul Molitor. We've heard from Edgar Martinez. And you're going to bring up a rookie and you're going to sit there and say, all you get to do is hit something you've never done. You're 20 years old. Like that's out of the, I don't want anything to do with that either. Marcelo is a different animal to me.
Hmm.
If anybody is going to start getting some ground balls at AAA at first base, of these two guys, it would be Marcelo Mayer because this kid is Cali smooth. Would it be hard? Do I think they'll do it? No, because for the same reasons. But then again, there is a chance this kid's a shortstop and they're calling him up to play third or they're calling him up to play second, right?
Right.
I just
And
think
they've
internally.
introduced those to him more regularly this year for the first time, really, in his minor league career.
Right. So there are a few other options other than say the Toro, the Sogards, and the Romy Gonzalez's. I know that he shut down these rookies coming up and changing positions. I get
Yeah.
it. But he didn't necessarily shut down current guys, right? And I know the big discussion here is sort of like the middle of the infield. Everybody's talking about Story. We're trying to figure out a way to get Marcelo up here. Campbell's in a transition. Another young kid that's learning second, that's learning center field. Do you just say, just learn first? I don't think there's gold over there at second, although I think he is getting better. I think is Marcelo a better defensive second baseman? Is Campbell a first baseman? We don't know. Like he's a guy kind of searching, right? We just love his bat. And I do think he's gotten a lot better at second base. And maybe it is too much to ask. And they probably say, no, we're not moving Ant Campbell. We're not moving Marcelo to first base at all. But if this Devers thing isn't the solution, I don't know what is. And that's where my mind starts drifting into guys like Campbell, guys like Meyer, things like that. Because quite frankly, the Meyer at shortstop, I don't know about you. I haven't seen too much of the kid. I still think Story's a better defensive shortstop. And I would
I
leave
think
him there
that
for now.
Yeah, I would my suspicion, and I don't know whether or not that plays out. Like prior to this year, I would have been confident that Story had more range than Meyer at shortstop. I do think that Marcelo is very smooth at that position and has a chance to be at least an average defensive shortstop, which is an incredible standard, by the way. Like people hear
Yeah,
average defender at shortstop, and they're like, "Yeah, is that all?" That's an incredible defensive player to
that's a
be
good defensive player.
the big leagues as a shortstop. But I think that my guess is that there's going to be a crossing of paths at some point, right? Because that's how age works. When you're Trevor Story, you'll lose some speed, you'll lose some range over time, and so at some point, Marcelo Mayer would probably be the superior defensive option at shortstop. But I don't know that we've arrived at that point yet. I know that Trevor Story's defensive metrics are down a little bit this year, but I think that that's based on a small sample that's a little bit misleading at this point. And I think that the Red Sox just value the metronome that Story provides at shortstop, right? Like I know that the infield defense overall hasn't been as good, hasn't been what the Red Sox or anyone expected it to be thus far this year, but Story is reliable. Their defense looked entirely different when he was at short in the last couple of years than when anyone else was there. And yeah, I think that there's probably going to be a reluctance to move him off the position, even though I think that he could probably move around, change positions as well, based on, we saw what happened when he moved to second base, no problem, and he was elite there.
Right.
But I think it's hard to take away your the guy who you've identified as your best infield defender and move him off of that and hope that the other pieces work out while calling up a rookie who would still be getting used to the clock of the game in the big
Well,
leagues.
this is where things get a little bit wacky, right? And I'll admit, I think Anthony is the wackiest, right? Because he's just
Yeah.
not an infielder. Um, And so they could be sitting there saying, "There's no chance in hell we're going to do this to Campbell. The kid's raking. That we're moving him around enough as it is." You know what I mean? And that
If I could,
scenario.
I
But
just want to jump in for 1 second there on Campbell. Like the interesting thing about Campbell is that they had no problem moving him all over the place last year and exposing him to different positions very suddenly and in response
yeah,
to injuries. Right? Marcelo gets injured. What happens? Kristian Campbell is suddenly a shortstop, and they actually were very impressed by what he was doing there. Now, I do think that there's concern this year about how that kind of compromised his development defensively at second base. But you do have that question of, is he going to be like, when you have Marcelo Mayer up in the big leagues, is what does your infield look like? Assuming that Trevor Story is still part of the team, what does your infield look like? So yeah, there is that interest. Like there were some evaluators this past offseason who were wondering whether or not Campbell would be able to handle first base, because obviously he has that bigger frame that you like to see as a
yeah.
first baseman. And he has shown, we've heard so much about how quickly he learns, and that is a great attribute that he's featured. He's bounced around already to 5 different positions professionally, and he's still at less than 200 professional games, I think. So
Well,
they
that's
have not.
that's that's the
Yeah,
part of it that is intriguing. That um, listen, it's not, nothing. None of this is a perfect scenario, and this is what happens when your
yeah,
starting first
yeah.
baseman goes down the end, at the end of May. So then you start having these conversations like, is this an option? Is this an option? Is that an option? And to me, it's like Devers is the option. Whether that happens or not, we'll see. Other than that, like Campbell, as you pointed out, is a guy that they have moved around a lot in his minor league career, albeit a short one. And if he's at first base, like, does that open up Marcelo coming up? Which then, just talking out loud, is kind of crazy, thinking that of the big three, the only one that isn't up here is the number one prospect in baseball. Right? Like, it's all, the whole thing is bizarre, but this is when you have injuries in certain spots, this is the discussions you have openly, and then things get shot down, you zero in on what your target may be. But like right now, I'm sort of wondering if it's Devers Campbell. You know what I mean? Long term, because
Hmm.
I don't think outside the organization. I keep hearing Anthony Rizzo. Yeah, if you need a first baseman in July, bring him in now. Give him 6 weeks to get ready. He hasn't had camp. He's missed
Right,
3 months. Like,
right.
I don't, and he wasn't. There's a reason why he's not signed in the first place. He wasn't exactly consistent. So you got to try to find something internally.
Yeah, the question of external is an interesting one, right? Like if you want a plug and play solution, then it would have to be someone who presumably has already had a full spring training and has been in
Yeah.
on someone else's roster, even a AAA roster. So you do wonder if like Dom Smith has an upward mobility clause, something like that would permit the Red Sox to go and sign him away from the Yankees, which is an interesting dynamic, just by virtue of being able to offer him a big league opportunity that might not exist in New York right now. But yeah, they're definitely in scramble mode, and yeah, there is that. It does feel like the cleanest roster solution is Devers, but that isn't necessarily, that doesn't mean that it's the right roster solution. And I respect the idea. Again, there needs to be, like, in order to figure out whether he's the best solution, then you need to have the conversation with him. And I think that's
Yeah.
probably that's probably where you're at as an organization.